Okay, welcome back. This is week 2, part 3 of the lecture. So you had to read page 5 through 15 for week 2's reading and just some notes on the core measures. Not large-scale achievement tests. Most given individually. So these are kind of some differences from formal assessments. Designed to measure a specific skills critical to successful reading. Different assessments for different purposes, and difference between primary grade assessment and assessments for older students. So kind of be aware that they're assessments that are geared for primary students as opposed to doing them with older students. Okay, so here are some type of assessments that it discusses in the beginning of the book. Okay, so screening, this is a baseline data help to determine a starting point. So having some clear mastery targets. So an example, I put DIBELS because that's one of the screening tools that we use at my school site, and it's actually one of the tests that I will be administering tomorrow. So it's also in your Lipson and Wixon book. Progress monitoring, ongoing and used to determine if students are making progress. So an example of that would be running records. Diagnostics. This is specific skill assessments to determine student strengths and weaknesses. And in my opinion, I feel that this would go after screening. So you would screen everyone, and then from your screening, you would have some target students. And then you would use diagnostics to get more information and determine proper interventions. So, and then you would do progress monitoring. So I feel like this part comes before progress monitoring. Outcome assessment, summative in nature, occur at the end of the unit or end of year. Can be the same tool used for screening. And one of the things I do want to highlight is that we're really focusing on diagnostics in our course. So you're going to be using learning how to use different types of diagnostic tools and how to create an intervention plan for your student. Okay, so why assess? According to the core, reading is a complex process. Two major processes in fluent reading are 1, decoding, 2, comprehension. Need to isolate these two components to see where breakdown is in order to provide targeted instruction to accelerate students. So looking at decoding and comprehension, you're going to figure out, okay, what is the student having trouble with? Is it just comprehension or is it decoding? Because you can't really go to comprehension when you're lacking those decoding skills. And there's a nice chart in your core book that kind of sequences it all for you. So here we go, right here. And I think this is a very useful tool for you, especially if you're going to be doing this at your school site. You can kind of see what assessments you should be giving per grade level and how many times. So I really like this chart and actually use it very often. Okay, and here is a diagnostic plan for primary grades. And please take note that this is for grades 2 to 3. So it's kind of a flow chart and it tells you where to start. And then if they're at grade level, you go to the right, and then if not, you go down. Okay, but for us, we're actually going to go in the opposite direction. Okay, so because we actually might get a K or 1 student. So in that case, you would not want to start with comprehension because that would be too difficult for your child. So we would start at the bottom where it's phoneme, working with phonemes, and then move up. Okay, so if they're doing okay here, then you move on to the next test. So we're actually going from the bottom up. Okay, moving on to RTI, response to intervention. Kind of give you just a brief overview of what that is. And I'm sure most of you have heard about it at your school site and are implementing this model. I'm sorry, that came out way too fast. Okay, so before, this is what the education system was doing before. So students were determined to have learning difficulties based on ability achievement discrepancy model. So problem solve by referring the students. So there were many referrals when students were having difficulty with little to no interventions in the classroom or any pullouts. So many students were getting referred to the special education system and were actually could have been solved in the classroom. And this is kind of the wait to fail model. So now with the NCLB and the Reauthorization of Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, determination of learning difficulties is now made by seeing how students respond to scientific research-based intervention. Okay, so this uses a problem-solving process to analyze the match between instruction and student needs. And that's just a very brief overview of RTI. Okay, so what is RTI? Response intervention integrates assessment and intervention within a multi-level prevention system to maximize student achievement and to reduce behavioral problems. So within RTI, schools are using data to identify students at risk for poor learning outcomes. Then they are monitoring their progress, providing research-based interventions, and then they adjust the intensity and nature of those interventions depending on how the student responds. So looking here, it's important to note that intervention in RTI isn't just academics. And that's what I feel that most teachers think it is. It's solely academics, but it can also include behavior. So just think about the classroom management and the behavior system that goes in the classroom. Sometimes that does not work for a percentage of students, and they may need an intervention. So the whole goal of RTI is prevention, to prevent academic and behavioral difficulties with early identification of need followed by immediate intervention. And these are some huge key words. Early identification or early intervention, because you're going to want to do your screening and then immediately get started on the intervention process. So some essential components of RTI: high quality research-based classroom instruction. And the reason why they are research-based because they are proven to be effective strategies. Universal screening, so all students should be screened about 3 times a year to identify those students who are not making expected academic progress. The screening measures should be brief, reliable, valid, those terms we used earlier, and they should be used to identify students who need more intense interventions. Research-based intervention. So along with the research-based classroom instruction, we want the research-based interventions. So like I said, instruction and interventions that are proven to be effective and help students meet their learning goals. Fidelity of intervention implementation. So the fidelity of intervention implementation must be monitored to ensure that students are receiving the interventions as designed and validated by research. Interventions should include guidelines and tools regarding implementation fidelity. Continuous progress monitoring. Data, data, data. So students need to be monitored frequently in order to determine whether the interventions are producing the desired academic gains. They should be brief, target specific skills, and be administered easily, and accompanied by decision rules to inform instruction. Professional development and collaboration. This is also very important in the RTI model because there needs to be high quality PD plan to support the teachers in implementing RTI. And this plan should also allow time for collaboration and coaching opportunities. Parent involvement. Parent involvement, it really encourages the parents and family members to be active partners in their education. So make sure you have an open communication about the screening process, progress monitoring, the interventions that are taking place, and the more the parents are involved in education, we all know that this definitely helps with student achievement. Okay, so here is the model. It's kind of messed up here, sorry. Okay, so here's the model. You may have seen it different ways, but essentially it's a tiered system. So there's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So right here is basic classroom instruction. So core classroom instruction for all your students. And here the teacher is also using proactive interventions oriented towards whole group instruction. So it doesn't mean that there can't be small group instruction, but generally this is where all the teaching is taking place with your core curriculum. So let me point out here, this is all students. So then, generally speaking, about 20 to 30% of the students in Tier 1 sometimes need more strategic instruction. So this is Tier 2. And one thing that I do want to mention is that make sure you're not labeling your students. You're not saying, this is a Tier 2 student. So no labels whatsoever. And here you are using, as mentioned before, research-based instructional practices. And then here, so from here, there might be students who still need assistance and more intensive intervention, and so that would be Tier 3. And you might not be able to help here. It's more of a specialist, so this would be your role as a literacy specialist, and your role would be helping the classroom teacher use best instruction in Tier 1. And also important to note that this is fluid. So the student might come here, and then this might be successful and then may go back here. Or it might be here, might be successful, and go back to the classroom. So a fluid system between the tiers. Okay, so kind of an overview of Tier 1 and Tier 2, and this was developed by my colleague, so it kind of tells you, the goal of each tier, who it involves, also the teachers who are involved in this portion, the setting, groupings, duration of time, and then the assessments. So if you wanted to start your own RTI, this is something that you might give to your colleagues so that they kind of understand what is happening within each tier. Okay, so 4 different types of assessments in the RTI, and this is stuff that we've already kind of reviewed. The universal screening 3 times a year, the diagnostic assessment, so we were kind of trying to figure out what skill that student needs, progress monitoring, and the summative outcome assessment. And sometimes this might be the same as your screening. Okay, and a timeline, just kind of to give you some ideas if you were doing your own RTI program at your school site. In September, you would administer the screening, like a DIBELS or DRA. Analyze the results to form your groups. And I'm kind of rushing here because I'm almost out of time and I don't want to have to do part 4. Okay, October, so you would start your Tier 2, do some progress monitoring, have your classroom teachers take data for their whole class as well and give those to you. In November, you would have meetings with your team, continue interventions, continue with the progress monitoring. So this kind of is just kind of like a cycle here. In December, have some reflection meetings, administer the DIBELS, and then that would be like your summative test, and then submit RTI feedback form. Okay, so here's some resources for you guys, and I'm really running out of time. So I'm going to leave you with these objectives. Okay, I think you guys got these. And this quote from the National Reading Panel says, for teacher education to be effective, it must change both teacher and student behavior. All right, you guys, have a good week, and thank you for listening to me.